Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here. I'm going to talk about the operational aspects of quality of service and quality of experience and give you some examples, not so much on the quality comparison, but more on what things happen, what are the effects, and what are you going to do about them. So as we started off this evening, quality of service is the condition of the delivery pipe. And as we know, garbage in, garbage out. Quality of experience is what the customers are happy about or unhappy about. Now, you can have a good quality of service, and that usually means you get a good quality of experience, but that's not always the case. If you don't have enough bits allocated, as we heard in the last presentation, you have an encoder or a transcoder that's bit-starved, you've given it a ceiling that you can't go above this bit rate, you're going to have some sort of negative effect on it. And depending on where and when these things happen in your stream, or how often they happen, it's going to result in a poor quality of experience. And conversely, a bad quality of experience is not always related to a bad quality of service. You can have overcompression artifacts, so everything is fine about the pipe, but you have deliberately chosen a or too low bit rate, perhaps, and your encoder, transcoder cannot deliver a good enough quality at that bit rate. Other things that you wouldn't expect maybe, but make sense to the average person, are frozen frames, black frames, audio silence, or loudness problems. Lip sync, one of the biggest ones, and that's still a difficult thing. Caption problems, depending on your perspective of what's important to you. And all of these could be related to something that's not your normal stream. It could be an ad insertion done by a BDU downstream. Could be someone in the master control who just hit the wrong switch and took the wrong output from the router. So I'll go back in time to the good old days of analog TV and talk about quality of service a little bit. We started off, all that was important was signal to noise, carrier to noise, or if you were in the cable business, you cared about composite second order and triple beats, and the average person saw snow or sparklies or ghosting. Then we went to digital TV. It was all about bits versus noise and trying to stay away from the dreaded digital cliff where ones and zeros have no meaning anymore. One of the other aspects of digital TV is the transport layer that didn't really exist before. So that's things in history like 15 years ago. We had a lot of DS3 circuits around. We had OC3, and everybody's interface was probably ASI from an encoder or a satellite receiver. And now we have IP delivery that dominates or is dominating. On the modulation front, it was pretty simple. We have had QPSK, 8PSK, 8VSB when we went to the ATSC digital television over the air, and QAM for cable. Things we worried about were bit error rates, EBNO, EVM, and MER. Those are all quality of service things that you can measure with tools. And here's some of the tools that we used for MPEG transport stream over 20 years ago. Yeah. ETSI came out with their TR290, which was a very simple dashboard that everybody loved, and it's still here with us today. It's especially popular in Europe. It's easy 3-level priorities. Top level priority told you things like, is the transport stream sync byte there? Is the program allocation table there? Are the program map tables there? Good, you could probably decode something. Maybe, maybe not. The level 2 was usually the trickier one. There were things like program clock reference, accuracy, and jitter. How well did the clock get transferred from the encoder side to the decoder side, and is it a good representation and accurate? And I've seen some really wacky things happen with PCR. Priority 3 was all about tables. In the case of DVB, it was things like service definition table and so forth. On the ATSC side, it was things like the PSIP tables that we're familiar with for over the air. Now, the one thing that never really got communicated with this ETR 101-290 is that it was best used at the output of equipment. So if you're sitting at the output of an encoder, a multiplexer, or at output of a transmitter, you can do some measurements and you can tell, hey, I'm in compliance, good stuff. It doesn't apply necessarily after you've gone over a satellite link or you've gone over a long terrestrial link, and especially not if you're going over a long IP encapsulated link. And that's where a couple of other standards came in. I believe it was 2009. The SCTE came out with their 142 spec, and the ATSC mimicked it or mirrored it with the A78 spec, and that's current today, fresh and useful. What it did was give you ranges of tolerance with more human, understandable outcomes, like transport streams off the air. That's bad. Program off the air, probably bad if that's the only program you have in the transport stream. Things like, oh, I'm missing an audio. Oops. Well, maybe that's bad, maybe it's good. Depends on if it's, descriptive video or it's the other language that you don't use, whatever the case may be. And then you went all the way down to technically non-conformant. That's like my table repetition rate is somewhere below where it's supposed to be, but all set-top boxes, all decoders, satellite receivers, whatever, can handle it, and I've got no problems. I'm not really worried about it. Now we come to IP transport. So this is MPEG-2 packets jammed into IP packets. Typically we have 7 MPEG-2 packets at 188 bytes apiece. Sometimes there's an RTP, real-time protocol header on there. Usually not. It's just UDP, send and forget, and then of course the IP at the end there. So all fits into one MTU, typically under 1,500 bytes. Problem with networks, whether it's a switch, a wide area network, a LAN even, is that your switches, your routers are subject to congestion. They'll drop packets. You can oversubscribe a port. If you have a 1 gig port and you suddenly try to jam more than 1 gig of traffic, things are going to get lost. There's also, because of these best efforts to move packets around, you can get inter-arrival time problems where you're waiting too long for a packet to come out the other end, and that leads to burstiness and big long gaps. And another concept called delay factor. Now that is a good one because it sort of represents how much buffering do I need in my decoder. And if you're designing a set-top box or an appliance or an app, you want to allocate so much memory to keep your buffer within a reasonable range, and you don't want to waste your buffer either. There's a nice little animation from one of my colleagues that we get to use again. Remember that everything in the MPEG world is related to an elastic buffer. You've got packets coming in, some of them are close together, some of them are far apart in the IP world, and you tend to want everything to be out at a regular rate on the outside of the output of the buffer. And as you see here, some things just go into the garbage because you either overflowed, or in the case of an underflow, you're going to get these little green blocks in the picture. Now, counting lost packets at the IP layer is not too helpful because, remember, we have 7 MPEG packets in an IP packet. Depends on where you've broken across one packet layer to the next. If you are in the middle of a group of pictures in MPEG, I frames, B frames, and P frames, and suddenly you're at the boundary to another IP frame in the wrapper, well, what if that one doesn't come in on time? What are you going to do? You never know what's going to happen. It's almost unpredictable. That brings us out of the quality of service realm into quality of experience. What are these things really going to do to us? Every industry has a different definition. You'll hear about this in marketing, and call centers have a quality of experience index or metric. For digital TV, I put these things together. It's an outage. It's silence. It's black freeze frames. It's dropouts. Mosaic and tiling, which is usually a layman's term, or blockiness. The dreaded lip sync that I've mentioned a few times. Loudness, we have the dial norm compliance requirements for TV and cable and satellite right now. Captioning problems still persist because Even though we have EIA 708 captioning with all its exotic capabilities, we tend to use just 608 captions and jam them in there. We have buffering problems, as we heard earlier. That is the #1 hassle, and it's going to be the biggest hassle going forward. You don't want that spinning disk or the little wait, please wait icon pop up. And also, if you consider all those files floating around there in the adaptive bit rate over the top world, you could have the wrong content. What if something's messed up when your app says, give me that lower bit rate stream now because I've just moved from Wi-Fi to LTE outside, and suddenly you've got a problem with your redirects on your content delivery network, and suddenly you get a different thing altogether. These are all quality of experience things that you wouldn't necessarily see as a quality of service problem. So, what do we tolerate? What annoys us? How long does it happen? How often does it happen? And how bad is it? Because customers will put up until they snap. The phone's going to ring, and probably more accurate now is you're going to get bad reviews on social media. They'll take to Twitter immediately and just hammer you, or your Facebook page will get slaughtered with negative comments. And the worst of all, they cancel their service, or they never come back to watch your content. So how do we measure and quantify quality of experience? There are metrics, as we heard earlier. It could be an arbitrary scale of 0 to 100, or it could have some more backbone than that. And remember that every decoder is not the same. They're all a little different. If you have a decoder from 10, 15 years ago, it's going to have different buffer models, different capabilities, different tolerances than a modern decoder, probably no better or worse than your phone that you're walking around with looking at YouTube videos. Compressed video is not linear in degradation. Unlike analog TV, where you knew you were getting deeper towards the noise, it doesn't happen that way. Every frame has a different meaning. If you have an impairment that hits you in an iframe, it's probably going to affect the entire group of pictures, which could be more than half a second, could be much, much longer than a second even, because group of pictures lengths are getting longer because everybody wants to squeeze as much out of the stream as they can. On the other hand, if you have an impairment that hits a B frame, boom, it's only 1/30th of a second, it's over, and it's probably only in a little portion of the picture that it's actually going to affect it. So even a bad bit could have a negative effect. It could turn a whole row of pixels to green, meaning an underflow, a missing slice. Here's another way of thinking about it. Quality of experience, where you see all the blockiness in the upper picture there. Those are slice errors, macro block problems, and so forth. And you can see that there's a natural hit in the quality of experience. What about the one on the bottom? It's kind of hard to see on the projector maybe, but that's an example of overcompression, where you've asked the encoder to give you some high motion, high detail content, but at a very low bit rate. The result is usually blocks or macro blocks where you can see a difference in the luminance between the edge of one and the adjacent one. And that may not seem like a big deal, but we pick that up with our human visual system very easily. So here's a non-exhaustive list of quality of experience problems and how they come back to the MPEG layer. We've got video packet loss, so that could be a continuity counter error. That's the 0 to 15 cycle count in MPEG packets, and it never ends, it keeps on going. And it could be at the same time that there's a video PID bitrate drop. You could correlate those two things and say, oh, that was really brief. I guess it was probably just one packet, perhaps. There are things like video syntax errors where you said, okay, here's my next slice, and there's some problem with how you describe the header, perhaps. If you did see a whole missing video slice, it could be a big green band right across the whole screen or a portion of the screen, and that's really just a special case of a syntax error. You could have an unexpected video header. Let's say you are missing a whole bunch of packets and suddenly you're up there. Oh, there's another video header. What's that happening? Why did that happen? I don't know. You could have a video PID dropout that lasts way more than 200 milliseconds, and that could be a continuity count error where you're missing a bunch of packets. You never know. You could have a video buffer underrun. This is where you get the decode timestamp that is greater than or equal to the current PCR, program clock reference, timestamp. That means that you've run out of content within your elastic buffer. So the usual result is a decoder either freeze frames on it and repeats what it had before, or some of the older ones, usually they'll show green, green meaning zeros, and magenta usually means ones, overflow. The overrun buffer example is where the decode timestamp is more than 3 seconds for MPEG-2 or more than 5 seconds for H.264 behind the current timestamp. So that means you've got too much stuff to fit into your elastic buffer, and some of it's got to go in the garbage. And here's that example that I used before, overcompression, when you're asking too much of your encoder or transcoder, or you've limited the bit rate in some artificial way. I remember watching a sports channel on TV that shall remain nameless. None of the people in this room are involved. And they always cheaped out on their satellite bandwidth or transponder cost. So I bet they didn't go above 1.5 megabits, and they're trying to show mixed martial arts and so forth, and I always got a kick out of all the overcompression blockiness. You didn't know if it was a foot or a hand or anything. And that's okay if it's very brief, but when it goes on for like seconds and seconds during a match, it'll drive you crazy, and you'll say, I'm not watching that anymore. So how do I troubleshoot in this awful place that we live? We need tools. We heard about tools earlier. That's what it's all about. If you don't have tools, you're just guessing and hoping that it'll go away, and it probably won't. So what can we do about this? You have to monitor a lot of places. And this may look like some sort of cable network. Well, it probably is. But guess what? This is looking more and more like every broadcast, OTT, IPTV, telco, whatever network. It's all about a workflow. It could be real time. This could be a workflow with file-based ingest. You still have to process that somehow, whether you do a QC step on it or you do some sort of editing and putting your bug in, adding commercials. It's probably a core network, whether it's within your facility or across the street or around the world. Then there's probably some more video processing when you finally deliver it to somebody, or you deliver it to your transmitter, your brand. I noticed there's modulation here. That could be RF if you're over the air or if you're doing some sort of cable broadcast, but it could be IP. This could be delivered to a content delivery network, and this edge distribution network could go all over the world to different CDNs that you have no control over. You have to monitor as many places as you can. Consider the things you're going to look for and how they affect quality of experience. Don't just worry about the quality of service. Look for things that are intermittent. Look for things that are bursty and annoying and frequent. Or look for things that are sustained over a long period of time. And the important thing is to try to do some sort of cross-layer analysis. If you see something that's happening on the output, you should always go and look at the input. Is this source bad? There's many cases where I've done some troubleshooting, and I've found that the pipe is perfect. There's nothing wrong with this. When you dig down and you realize that, hey, this is being fed some video from some other place across the country, you may find that there's a timecode problem. There's a bunch of skipped frames. It looks great because the link is fine, but people see it. They go, whoa, that was a missed frame. There was a missed frame. There was no quality of service alarm related to that. So that would be perhaps a baseband audio-video fault. And the worst case is, as you see along the right side there, we have delivery to many, many devices now that we never had before. It's not just a television hooked up to an antenna on the roof. It's not a television hooked up to a set-top box necessarily that's being fed a beautiful, clean cable signal with perfect carry-to-noise and no CTB and all that stuff. You're probably hitting a neighborhood's serving area for IP, whether it's telco or cable delivered. You're probably going into a Wi-Fi network in the home that somebody set up themselves, and guess what? There's a Wi-Fi network right next to them, or if you're in an apartment building, there's a lot of Wi-Fi going on there. I see Wi-Fi as being the chief, most challenging problem to troubleshoot, because you're never going to be able to capture it all properly. I saw a presentation from a vendor last fall, and they were talking about Wi-Fi monitoring and troubleshooting. And I think that 66% of the problems in a home were all related to Wi-Fi. You know, it's not just making sure that your email came to your phone. It's, did my YouTube video keep playing? Did my Netflix stop and rebuffer just because I moved a foot to the left or foot to the right? So let's look at a couple of graphical, real-world problems. These are pretty simple. You know, they're certainly not exhaustive. Here's a customer complaining about blocking or tiling in the layman's terms. And maybe the operations people, master control, are getting some sort of alerts from a monitoring probe that we showed in the previous slide. Somebody takes a capture of the video, saying, okay, what's wrong with this thing? And guess what? Well, I'm looking at it here, and I'm not the master control operator, probably know a little bit more about this, and I see some blockiness around the guy's head. I'm betting that that's a B-frame problem because the background doesn't look like it's messed up. So I say that this is the guy's head being moved across the group of pictures. Just a good guess. Well, maybe we have a probe that'll tell us about it, and it says, oh, I see, we have a video buffer underrun. Well, there's something good to know, because you wouldn't have been able to guess that unless you knew something about what's going on deeper in the layers. And if you were to do a deep dive analysis on it, let's say you took it offline and you have an MPEG analyzer, buffer analyzer, you could see that the presentation timestamp is actually going below 0. That's saying, okay, I want you to present it before it really happened. And that doesn't work. That's called an underrun. So there we go. Yeah. PTS minus PCR time should never go below 0. That's bad. What's the solution to that? In this case, maybe it's a cable operator or something, and they regroom the mux. So give it a reboot, refresh it, whatever the case may be, and you'll get back to normal. This is tantamount to when you call up and say, I'm having lip sync problems. What do I do? They say, well, channel up, channel down. Is the problem still there? Oh, you fixed it. That's great. Because you've just refreshed the buffers. It's that simple. Here's an example of discontinuities. So this is the 0 to 15 continuity count that's missing packets in the MPEG transport stream or the program stream. Customer once again complains about continuous tiling for the program. It's happening all the time, driving me crazy. So you can see that there's a bunch of blocking across the top, stripe or slice errors. Maybe you have a probe that'll tell you if you have the tool. And you're going to see that, okay, we've got a bitrate change. We have a arbitrary scale here. The quality of experience dropped way down to 26 instead of, a high range. And of course you see some video packet loss. So that helps you. Maybe you go and you check other programs that are on that same feed. If this is a cable feed, it could be a multi-program transport stream, not just a single one. And you find that they're all having discontinuity problems. Well, that's telling you something that there's a QoS problem on that transport stream. And you could do another dive and find out that, yes, we have discontinuities. Houston, we have a problem. If you want to do a really deep dive, you could go and look at the elementary stream, the video stream, and find out exactly where it happened. It could be in different places that you didn't expect, and it would probably tell you more about the slice problems and the macro block problems. Here's a different problem. Let's say our arbitrary scale of 0 to 100 goes down to 95. And this is kind of arbitrary. Here in the picture we see that there's a certain amount of distortion, but overall, you know what's going on here. It's just snooze. You're probably not going to get too offended by this right away. Maybe we see these problems. There's some packet loss in video and audio. If it's very quick, less than a second, I bet people are not too upset by that. This is what doesn't annoy them. Okay, it's brief, it didn't happen over and over and over again. I can deal with that. I'm not going to cancel my subscription. Here's a worst case. Let's give it an arbitrary number of 85. This is where you've got two scenes coming together in a collision course. Video impairment lasted about a second because there was a missing video slice at a scene transition. So that's probably where an iframe happened. Bad place to do it. Has a bigger, more deleterious effect on your quality of experience. And what happened was one frame overwrote the next one, and you got sort of a mishmash, a mashup of exactly two different scenes. As long as it didn't persist and keep going, no problem. But still, you've been penalized. You get an 85 score. 85 is not bad. Here's another one. This would be 75. So this is getting to the edge of saying, oh, this is bad. And it's going to be a commercial being cut off and another program, jammed into it on the return. This is not as common as some people would expect, but it certainly happens more in the U.S. where ad insertion is a big money maker. So if you've lost a commercial, depends on how you look at it. If you want to watch the commercial, that's a problem. If you got annoyed because the commercial crashed into your program just before the killer was found out at the end of the show, that's very bad. Here's another one. I'll give this a 66. This means that there's a soccer game, lots of high action, and there's a lot of blockiness going on, and there's a video slice error at a real bad time, and it lasts for about 2 seconds. So maybe you missed the goal. And here we have a deeper look at the group of picture structure. It goes along, the green's an iframe, and there's the group of pictures. There should have been another iframe right there because we just ran out of new information. We needed to refresh it with another iframe. Remember, the longer the GOP, the more you're guessing at what's happening in the future. Some GOPs are up to like 60 and 64 and 90 frames. If something goes wrong there, it goes wrong for a long time. Here's the case where you've missed a slice and you've got another scene change there where it should have been an iframe, and boy, it's bad. Here's one, I don't know if this is realistic. Give it a 5. 5 out of 100, that's bad. Image broke up and it froze for 2 seconds, and then the next frame after that was all distorted. And once again, here I was trying to watch that mixed martial arts, and I missed the whole thing, and I don't know what happened. So this is an extreme example, and it's repeated, and it's not just brief and inconsequential. So I could go on and on about that. I mentioned lip sync. Lip sync is a real challenge, and I don't really know if we've got that one figured out yet. Think of the buffers. There's independent buffers for video and audio, and if one of them gets out of sync with the other, especially if audio is in the lead, that's really annoying to customers. And if it stays like that until the time that they change to a different service and come back, that's going to really bother them. So what do we do about this? Aside from having the tools, we try not to get overwhelmed by the problems. I've walked into facilities where somebody's got a nice new fresh tool, like the ETR 101-290, and they're looking at it and everything is in red, and they're overwhelmed by it. They just look at the log and they say, oh, it's all a mess. Your equipment's garbage, or that guy's equipment's garbage. Fix it. And they stop looking at it, especially if this is a network operations center. These guys don't get paid big bucks to sit there and watch TV all day. They get intimidated by this stuff, and they'll ignore it. What you want to do is reduce them to a smaller, actionable set of alarms, alerts, that they can do something about, and they should be related to quality of experience. Quality of service is somebody else's job maybe to look at. One of the smarter, more experienced guys goes and troubleshoots something after the network operations or the master control guys say, we had a problem last night and it was at this time, can you go figure it out? Deal with the major offenders first, work your way down, correlate the alerts. If you know that the problem is still there at the start and it's there at the output, figure out where it came from, fix it at the source, fix it within your network, look at the trends, check them, and refine and improve. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you may have a few actionable alerts and things to fix every day, maybe not. Eventually, the job gets easier, your customers are happier, and we carry on to bigger things. So, questions?
Do you find it's sufficient to provide you a good picture of your end-to-end if you combine QoE measurements at a certain point and then rely on QoS in between
I think
at the processing points?
the best way is if you can correlate the results at different points. So at worst case, you only have one tool and you have to monitor your output, but it doesn't tell you anything more than that. If you could correlate between your source and your output, you're one step ahead. And if you can correlate at many different network monitoring points, especially out in the wild world of tablets and mobile devices, that would be the best. Having mentioned that, I should say that if you consider, let's say you have an app and it's giving QoS and QoE metrics back to you, it's not necessarily going to give you the big picture, because as I said, if you move from Wi-Fi to LTE or you plug into LAN, you're going to get something that's unexpected. All those data points coming back from all over the place are pretty hard to make sense of. So,
Would you say that QoS is typically easier to do on a large scale than QoE?
oh yeah, yeah. QoS is like a hard exact science compared to QoE. QoE is what people want it to be. Some operators would not care at all about certain errors. Other ones would say, oh, it's a disaster if I had, half a second of black frame at the start of my news or something like that.
So less on a technical level and more on I got my consumer hat on. Do you find that the major, we'll say, cable providers in Canada use these kinds of tools to see what's going on? Because frankly, except for maybe one or two examples, I see all of that stuff every week on my service.
Yeah.
And no matter how many times, I'm tired of calling and complaining.
Well, yeah, that's a
and
good point.
unfortunately, there were some slides, I don't want to go on a rant here, but there were some slides there that said, 49% of customers are threatening to change to another service. Well, in Canada, where you have geographic monopolies, that's not that easy to do.
Very true.
So I'm just curious how many of those major cable providers are actually using tools like that to assess what's going on, at least on a QoS side.
They're actually moving farther into the QoE space now. 10 years ago, not so much.
Seems to me like you want to get your QoS stuff organized first.
That's right. QoS analyzers, monitors have been around for over 10 years in one sense or another. Actually, more than that, more like 15 to 20 years when I first used a transport stream analyzer. Only in the last, say, less than a decade, has quality of experience monitors been really something that people have used. Every operator, whether it's cable or satellite or an IPTV or an OTT provider, everybody is using slightly different tools because there's lots of vendors, there's lots of expectations, there's not a lot of common understanding about this. So where one guy says, I want to know everything about my QoS and QoE, the other guy says, well, just answer the phones, we'll figure it out. And that the attitude varies based on operator. It doesn't matter if it's the biggest or the smallest, everybody has a different approach to it. I say they're getting better, considerably better. Okay.